The World Bank has approved a 7.6 billion rand loan for South Africa's Covid-19 emergency response project. The loan comes following a request by the South African government for assistance in financing vaccine procurement contracts. That's according to a statement out this morning. Let's talk about this with Chief Economist Alexander Forbes. Isaah Mhlanga. Isaah, good to have you on the program, as always. Welcome. So is this a loan that we need, do you think?
Look, first, let's contextualize this loan. It's 7.6 billion rand. In terms of its size, if we compare to the size of the economy, it's 0.1%. If we compare it to our total expenditure, it's 0.4%. If we compare it to what we need to borrow this year alone, which is 335 billion rand, it's only 2.3%. So it's very small in the bigger schemes of things. So it's not something that we need to be worried about. But as they say, it will be used for even things that we have already spent or that we have already used in terms of vaccines. But the other aspect that we also need to consider is it does provide a monitoring mechanism for SA, given that we are a country that is, struggling with a lot of corruption. If the World Bank borrows us this money, it means they are going to oversee how that money is used, free of charge. So we don't have to employ the police or the SIU to monitor how that money is used. So there are a lot of benefits, in addition to it being a low interest loan relative to how much we borrow. If we look at the 10-year bond yield, which is currently at 10.5%, it makes a lot of economic sense in that it is a low interest loan.
And let's explain then some of the technical language for those of us who aren't in the space, because the statement says that this project will retroactively finance the procurement of 47 million COVID-19 vaccine doses by the government of South Africa. I know the vaccine rollout itself has not been without controversy, because as things stand, it's not been a great success because it has still been sluggish. In the main, a lot of people are yet to be vaccinated.
Look, retroactively, I think it means to say all the vaccines that we might have procured, or the PPEs that we might have procured but have not paid for, it can then pay for those that we've already used, which means it's not necessarily forward-looking in terms of its use. It will pay for things that we might have already used but haven't paid for. That's what it meant. Yes, in terms of the take-up of the vaccine, it has not been to where it's expected. But I think if we just want to look at the debates which we've had to say, why is the country going to the World Bank, there are many economic reasons why that should be, because it's cheap in terms of interest costs, but also it's very small to even make noise about it. Small
to make noise about it, you say, but could it have been avoided? Did we really have to go seek a loan to pay for these vaccines and other COVID-19 program-related expenses? Did we not have money in the kitty that could have financed that without owing anyone anything?
Look, South Africa borrows from the markets every week, with or without the loan from the World Bank. We borrow on a weekly basis, funds that are north of 7 billion rand every week, which means this amount of loan that we got from the World Bank, we could have borrowed in 1 week. We continue to do so for much of the remainder of the year. So the question of whether this could have been avoided or not, it's really neither here nor there. Because in any case, we are still borrowing from the market north of 7 billion every week.
So that we are already borrowing automatically means that we should not worry about borrowing more.
No, we should worry about borrowing more. But what we should actually be thinking about is, do we borrow in the market at 10.5% interest rate, which is a very high cost of debt, or we borrow from the World Bank, which is much more cheaper, potentially even less than half of what we are borrowing from the market. And in addition to that, we get the World Bank to come and monitor the money free of charge, where we are at least given a reasonable probability that we are going to see less corruption on it. So I think we are just trying to have a non-debate here, trying to argue that we shouldn't have went to the World Bank while we are borrowing from the market at a very extreme cost, while the World Bank gives us a very low interest loan. In addition, giving us the monitoring mechanism. And just to contextualize for you, China, that has a lot of funds and money, and actually, US dollar reserves of north of $3 trillion. They borrowed from 1999 to 2011 about $40 billion. They also borrowed from 2016 to 2018 about $6.2 billion.
Right.
Why they are doing that? They are getting the monitoring of that, how that money is used free of charge. And all this money is going to projects like transport, public administration, water sanitation and waste management, agriculture, industry and trade, where you actually need to unlock that investment in future economic growth. We would also have said China should not have went and borrowed from the World Bank, given that they have a lot of money. They're doing so to get the monitoring free of charge. And I would guess we also need to introduce that, given that we have a lot of corruption in the public sector, that waste a lot of funds that are borrowed. You
mentioned corruption, and I wondered to what extent you think that suspicion from the various corruption scandals in this country is what's raised suspicion about the borrowing of money, even from institutions such as the World Bank or wherever else we seek finances, and how it will be spent. So what I'm trying to ask is, do you think government itself has, from past experience, worked itself into a corner where people will be suspicious of whatever is announced that has money linked to it?
Of course, that will always remain. You would remember when the floods hit KZN, there was an outcry to say all the funds that might be dispersed from National Treasury must be rather be given to NGOs to manage in those disaster relief, instead of given to local authorities that are in the public sector. That is evidence that there is a lot of concern by many South Africans as far as corruption is concerned, which is why it's quite important to get a different mechanism to monitor how those funds are used.
Right.
And I'm sure if we do get the World Bank coming to monitor the use of its own money, some of its monitoring is also going to spill over in some of the projects that we have.
Quick final one then. The world over, we're talking about the rise in cost of living. Some of it has to do with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In the US now we're hearing about a possible recession there as well. What does that mean for our long-term economic prospects, well, short and long-term?
Look, the short-term economic prospects are not going to diverge from what we see in the rest of the world. South Africa cannot grow while the rest of the world is not growing, because we are a very small open economy, quite influenced by what happens in the global economy. So if we see a global recession, South Africa will be dragged along other economies. As far as the long-term economic growth rates, they depend on the economic reforms that we have been talking about, whether we actually implement them or not. So far, we have seen a very slow implementation, which implies that until we see full implementation of those reforms, growth will remain quite low. In our assessment, a 2% economic growth rate over the long term in the absence of economic reforms. But if we do get the reforms, we might get growth that is above 3%, which in itself is not sufficient to reduce the unemployment rate that we have.
Economist Isaah Mhlanga, good to have your time as always, so thank you.